The being maps with my feeling. Something like such. Birth. Loss of mercy. Contentment. Thing. Refuge me.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. I'm fucking super out of focus. Why is it doing that? Fix yourself, camera. Goddamn thing.
I just went to the Holocaust Museum in LA.
Okay.
Yesterday. Or
You're live on YouTube, by the way, so.
Oh, okay. Well, it's just, I mean, of course,
Which Holocaust
so
museum?
emotional and everything, but I mean, honestly, I was
Which
thinking
one?
a lot about, D&G and like
Which
how
one?
fascism comes to be,
Which one? Which museum?
Uh, it's over by the Grove in LA.
Oh yeah, no, I know that one. I was going to
Yeah.
work with them to build out a project there. Really incredible setup they've got.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's actually the second one I've been to. It's just so intense every time, but I don't know, it's good to be
true.
aware of what's going on.
It is. I used to live 3 blocks from there.
Oh,
Like-
no kidding.
Yeah, my son was born at Cedars down the street.
Oh, okay.
Right across from the Grove, where we put in the first IMAX VR.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I've got a storied history with the area, you could say. But that's the way that goes. It looks like, Noah, it's just going to be you and me here in the Discord. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Anti-Oedipus. We took a break for a week. As always happens whenever I do that, when I come back the following week, we have fewer people join right up because momentum's a thing and real life gets in the way. It's how it goes. Real life gets in the way. Last week, medical stuff, you can't break that. It's just the way it happened. But we are going to continue where we basically left off last week. So let me make sure in the Discord that I'm sharing the right screen. So that way all that stuff can be read by all of you there. And then let's make sure all of you can join me here as I read too. All right. We are deep into chapter 4 of Anti-Oedipus. For those of you who are maybe on your first run through of Anti-Oedipus or even second or third, the way the book is divided is, I think, fairly crisp. Up front, they give a very top line. Top line as in simplified, but not lack of complexity. The first entire chapter is incredibly complex, but it's much more of an affirming, here's what we're putting forward, with minor critiques. The second chapter is an entire section of critiques. The third is a universal history of following desire through to the formation of the BWO and capital. And chapter 4 is schizoanalysis. And schizoanalysis itself, we'll just say I have, as everyone here knows, I have issues with the word for a bunch of reasons. It sounds cooler and edgier, I think, than it really ought to. Because one of the great challenges is that they're not talking about schizophrenia, not like we know it today. Things are very different with this. And so when they're talking about schizoanalysis, they're talking about, for us, instead of psychoanalysis, which is based in the psyche, the individual, the ego, we should instead place the process inside of the schiz, the process of individuation and separation and breakage that happens inside of desire. And that's what chapter 4 is really about, is getting at what is the way that we would have this discussion? How would an analyst and an analysand deal with each other inside of this, after all their critiques of psychoanalysis, after all the stuff that they've said, after all their ways that they've completely shattered representation and Oedipus and all of this? Well, what do you do with it? And the Introduction to Schizoanalysis, chapter 4, is about breaking that down with further critiques, with further elements of constructive elements, with further things that you can be doing. And we've been slowly making our way, and we're going to be rereading, I think, this paragraph for the third time in a row, because there is just a huge amount that is said inside of all of it, and there's a lot that's worth sort of going into when we have these discussions. So with that said, I want to thank all of you for coming and joining us today. If you like what we do, feel free to join the Discord. We'd love to have you join us. Discord.gg/DGQC. And of course, if you like... what's up, LJ? Hello, LJ.
Hi. I think the schedule bot never corrected.
It did not. I'm deleting schedule bot tonight. So it not only not corrected, it actually did one worse. It did correct. So this is insane, but Discord itself does account for daylight savings. But our Discord bot actually undid that and corrected it for the incorrect time. Which
yeah,
is,
I mean, I'm just saying, like, a lot of people might want.
oh no,
to
they'll be
join.
showing up in an hour, maybe, or
Yeah, or
it's
maybe you can just manually add everyone again, like last time would happen.
it should have pinged people, but I will do that again. That's a fair point. Add everyone, despite the broken scheduler bot saying that noon is in an hour. All right, that'll be fine. And we're going over last week's stuff anyway, so it's fine if people join a little bit late. Thanks for reminding me, LJ. But as I was saying, if you support us, Patreon's the best way. Super chats are fun, all that stuff's great, but the biggest deal, joining the DGQC, that would be lovely. But after all that ramble, chapter 4 is about the elements of what schizoanalysis can do, how we can work with schizoanalysis, what we can do inside of these things. The bit we've been focusing on is the way that psychoanalysis utilizes symbolic or metaphorical elements, theatrical elements we're going to be getting into, in order to make sense of or to talk about what is happening inside of you, inside of us, inside of the analyst, inside of the analyst and giving those tools there. When we talk about theatrical, we do mean that. When we talk about the performative, placing masks on, or playing ourselves as a representative of, oh, you're being just like your dad, you're play acting your dad. But when we talk about these things, we're speaking of it as if there is a theatrical element. Now, the big push for this is sort of over time, the reason that we've gotten here, and again, big for D&G to sort of have this conversation of over time rather than all at once. When we talk about psychoanalysis didn't just appear in a day. The term may have, the practice as we know it, but these things don't just show up. They're born of material conditions grown over time and sort of a historical and social sort of reality that's pushing on them from behind. The theatrical is going to be the case of that as well. How is it that Oedipus and other things are trapped in this? So we're going to read the paragraph as we did last week, and we're going to spend, again, time going back through bit by bit and beating up on it and talking through it and hopefully making it to maybe a second or even a third paragraph. As I joke, chapter 4 takes half the time of the book every time we go through it. But to read. Why the theater? How bizarre this theatrical and pasteboard unconscious. The theater taken as the model of production. Even in Louis Althusser, we are witness to the following operation. The discovery of social production as machine or machinery, irreducible to the world of objective representation, Vorstellung. But immediately, the reduction of the machine to the structure, the identification of production with the structural and theatrical representation, Darstellung. Now, the same is true of both desiring production and social production. Every time that production, rather than being apprehended in its originality, in its reality, becomes reduced, in this manner, to a representational space, it can no longer have value except by its own absence, and it appears as a lack within this space. In search of the structure in psychoanalysis, Mustafa Safwan is able to present it as a contribution to a theory of lack. It is in the structure that the fusion of desire with the impossible is performed, with lack defined as castration. From the structure there arises the most austere song in honor of castration. Yes, we enter the order of desire through the gates of castration. Once desiring production is spread out in the space of representation that allows it to go on living only as an absence and a lack unto itself. For a structural unity is imposed on the desiring machines that joins them together in a molar aggregate, the partial objects referred to a totality that can appear only as that which the partial objects lack, and as that which is lacking unto itself while being lacking in them. The great signifier, symbolizable by an inherency of a -1 as the ensemble of signifiers. Just how far will one go in the development of lack traversing the structure? Such is the structural operation. It distributes lack in the molar aggregate, the limit of desiring production, the borderline separating the molar aggregates and their molecular elements. The objective representations and the machines of desire is now completely displaced. The limit now passes only within the molar aggregate itself, inasmuch as the latter is furrowed by the line of castration. The formal operations of the structure are those of extrapolation, application, biunivocalization, which reduce the social aggregate of departure to a familial aggregate of destination, with the familial relation becoming metaphorical for all others, hindering the molecular productive elements from following their own lines of escape. It's a lot of fun language. I know, it's a lot of fun language. Let's talk about a couple things here. Obviously, the references are going to be very important here. In the original French, they don't say representation objectif with Vorstellung in parentheses. They actually just use the term in the original French, because this is what they're kind of getting at, is Freudian sort of terms of how these things work. This is through Althusser. Althusser is a Marxist philosopher who played with psychoanalysis kind of a lot. Wrote some interesting stuff. But what his goal was, Althusser, was to sort of play with ideology and social reproduction through Marx. He wanted to look at, again, the question that a lot of people are focused on, like what makes this space of social repression exist? How is it that people come to enjoy their repression or even want it? How is it that people like this? Why is this the case? And for him, it was trying to structuralize ideology. And he did this by talking about kind of two different sort of sides of things. Not him, psychoanalysis in general too, and Heidegger and a bunch of others, talked about Vorstellung. Vorstellung is this idea of the mental representation that's objective, the thing you see, and how it is presented to the conscious as thought. It's kind of Kant, it's German idealism as a background, but the idea is like it's the conception or idea of a thing, the mental representation, the objective mental representation, how things appear to the mind. Whereas with Darstellung, and I'm not pronouncing these things correctly, it's German, it's a lot more phlegm is needed, and I don't have enough today. But for Darstellung, it's not so much the apprehended or the comprehended image as it's sort of handled, but instead the performative element, the representational cover of a thing, the staging of a thing. And these two bits are a huge deal. Althusser basically talks about, and it's what they're talking about here with Althusser, Witness to the Operation, Discovery of Social Production. Initially, Althusser spends a huge amount of time talking through social production itself works as machinery, the machines of the social world, that isn't really reducible to objective representation in his statements. But he immediately reduces it instead to structure, which is a theatrical representation. It's more of a facade around the thing. It's a big deal here, as we talk through sort of D&G overall, because when things are reduced to Darstellung, this theatrical representation, the structure of the thing, it's defined not so much by what it is, but what it is missing instead. So when a thing is staged, it's staged when we talk about that, when a play is put on. It's actually, the reason we call it a play and not real is because it's missing something. It exists as missing something. Even if it's incredibly immersive, it's the best play you've ever seen, it's missing something. Something is necessarily lacking in it. The structure of the thing has a lack, definitionally, in how it sort of exists. So when we talk about the way we see the world, or what the world is, or how we perceive it as structural first, we're kind of introducing that lack. And Althusser does very, very clearly, tucks right to it, and runs through that sort of exactly. Mustafa Safwan, who's an Egyptian psychoanalyst. For him, it was about developing a theory of lack. That's his big deal. Like, was actually in that, and he spent a lot of time sort of working off of a lot of what Jacques Lacan did. Lacan borrowed from him as well. And again, structure and lack come together, because this is the play that psychoanalysis seems to have made, because it's not trying to get at, and it wasn't trying to get at the actual real workings of things. That's not really what they're doing. Instead, they are continually bringing it back to, as he says, now the same is true of desire and production and social production. Every time that production, rather than being apprehended in its originality, in its reality, becomes reduced in this manner to a representational space, it can no longer have value except by its own absence, and it appears as a lack within the space. Because when we talk about the factory without the goods, or the people in it, or the life force that's kind of making it pump, it is the empty structure. Its lack is defined in it. Lack is set up in that position. And so this puts us in a spot very, very quickly where what we're talking about is that of lack introduced into this objective space, or the social space, or however we want to talk about it. It's this thing that's happening in this process. Is that making sense to people generally, as I'm sort of rambling through it? Good. Because the lack is the big deal that they're focusing on here. Because when psychoanalysis focuses on lack, and very explicitly psychoanalysis, whether it's through Foucault, Lacan, whatever it is, desire is born of lack in all of these things. It's born of the element that's missing. For Lacan's mirror stage, again, you have to think of what lack is inside of this, and how lack forms. For Lacan, the mirror stage, as an example, when a child realizes that they are seeing themselves in the mirror, but that thing in the mirror is not them. There's a distance that's immediately created between myself and I. Instead of the embodied I that I experienced before that, suddenly I'm seeing myself as a separate thing, as an idea, as a representation, as a stage play, as this other thing that immediately doesn't have me in it, that has that distance, and that lack is built into it. That lack of existence that is sort of baked into the symbolic order across the board. As soon as I have that and I see myself in that way, I see everyone in that way. It kind of comes at once for Lacan. This is how we gain language. This is how we gain all of it. But at the base of it, desire, libidinal desire, is born of this moment. It's born of this crack, this lack. And lack is what births and is the source for all of these things, for Lacan and for all of this. That's it. So it's the baseline. So when we talk about like how these things operate and how we're focusing, we're really pushing away from representation, that of the stage, that of the symbolic, which has lack buried in it, instead to the productive elements of things, desiring production as it works, if that makes sense. If that makes sense. This crack, this lack, it's not far off. And when you start talking to Lacan, Zizek, and you go through it, you'll see that there is a huge through line, because that break with everything else that creates the symbolic order, creates that yearning, that drive, that push towards rebuilding it, that empty sort of pit that everything can go into that never has a bottom, to be frank. And that's this thing that's playing on, because when you reduce production to, as he says, design production to this weird space and representation, it can't have a value except by its own absence. It appears as a lack. This is the way that these sort of structuration of things work. The structural unity, as he says at the bottom, is imposed on desiring machines that joins them together in a molar aggregate at large. The partial objects, referred to as a totality that can appear only as that which partial objects lack, and as that which is lacking unto itself, well, lacking in them. This is him playing with and their critique of Lacan coming very far. And that is that thing. How far will one go in the development of a lack of lack traversing the structure? A lack of lack traversing the structure, which is kind of how this builds on itself very, very quickly. Such is the structural operation, the structuration of things. It distributes lack in the molar aggregate, necessarily. This is a space of representation. No, it appears as lack because it's a misinterpretation of three syntheses. It is a paralogism. A break is found in the syntheses which appears to be lacks, but the breaks are productive. When we turn them into structuation, we become invested in those larger structures which seem to produce lack or that negative, and as such we become that negative sort of helps build our structuation as well. It's incredibly complex as we sort of play with that, but it's really fascinating. I like the lines. So when we talk about sort of at length this interplay, it really is the way that they made that move from this originary space that had been going on a long time, this idea of the Vorstellung, the way that the conscious thought has things presented to it, and the move towards the sort of stage play of things, where the structural lack or the lack that's within it is sort of baseline to its existence. And we see this a lot. We see people talk about things, the structure of things in this way that's much more representational or symbolic or has these issues with it. This is sort of what they're playing with, more or less. And that's the line they have here. The formal operations of the structure are those of extrapolation, application, and biunivocalization, which reduce the social aggregate of departure to a familial aggregate of destination. Extrapolation, application, biunivocalization are three of the five paralogisms as they outlined in the first chapter. This is the important layer for schizoanalysis. It's to see this, to have this as an awareness as you talk through this, and as you sort of deal with these things.
Hey, Brooks, I have a question.
Please.
What do they mean here when they say the limit of desiring production, the borderline separating molar and molecular? Are they saying that there's like an innate border that gets displaced via a lack, so it all appears to just be molar? Or no?
So
I don't get what borderline means there, I guess.
So take the sentence as a whole. The limit of desiring production is now completely displaced. Desiring production, well, social production is desiring machines in contingent circumstances. They're determined elements. It is still the limit of desiring production. This is the borderline that separates the molar aggregates from the molecular. There is a line where the mole versus the molecular. When we talk about things in that space and the line between that and the molecular, this border, this limit of desiring production, because desire doesn't desiring machines don't connect to social machines. Desiring machines have their limits. Their limit is desiring production. When you move into the aggregate and you have that limit becomes entirely displaced now, because we're basically recrushing all of these things back into itself. So when we talk about these social relations that are now there, and we've displaced where the edge of desire is before the social, we've now actually only got the line, as they say, the limit now passes only within the molar aggregate, in as much as the latter is furrowed by the line of castration. So as such, all of the theatrical elements become centered on lack. Desire is in terms of only what's absent. The structural unity that exists of the family, mom, daddy, me, my growth, my existence, the molar becomes all of it, because we no longer have that limit of desiring production. It's been entirely displaced through representation. Does that make sense or not?
Awesome. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you.
Yeah, it's again, there isn't like a line there. That's probably the part that's, I think, a little on the weird, frustrating side, right? Because it's a phrasing thing that they do. That's like, come on, guys, what are you doing? And it's like, they're more talking in general about the nature of, again, social machines are organized social forms. Like they're productive social forms. They're telephones, the internet, this reading, whatever it is, the QC, America, all that stuff, versus the molecular flows of desire. When we're talking about that sort of element, we're talking about how desire ultimately kind of finds its limit past and moves into castration, like how these things happen. It's not saying that this is determinate. It's saying these are the social conditions that create that and build that sort of place in and of itself, sort of. The formal operations of structures are these three, blah, 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 with the family relation becoming metaphorical for others, hindering molecular productive elements from following their own lines of escape. Now, all lines of escape necessarily have to be fit to mommy, daddy, me. The metaphor of it all, the symbolic of it all continues to crush back because things can be, words. When we talk about words, this happens to, I think, all of us. But like words shift their meaning based on who's saying them and what we're really trying to get at. When we're talking about big ideas, we find words that kind of shift in and out of particularities or unique instances. When we're talking about, for example, that tree versus trees, or we're talking about my wife versus my kid's mom. It's the same person. Both are symbols, though, of Heather, who's lovely. I'm a dad. I'm also Brooks. I'm also a husband. I'm also a son. These are all things that designate me, but they're roles, they're positions, they're words that represent a larger structure innately in the word. And by privileging those words, by putting those words into very particular spaces, desire doesn't have a lot of places to go. When I say I am a son, that comes with a big bunch of shit. That's not saying that's not just denoting like a general relationship. There is a structural reality to what that word means. And we can shift these words in and out. We can use metaphors to play with them. And what happens is these family relations, because they are baseline to how we sort of were raised, where we were cared for, how we relate to people, and we were taught early on, this familial relation becomes everything. Daddy or mommy, depending on your relationship with daddy or mommy, can mean a million different things. Traditional families, it means the strong father, the demure mother. Doesn't have to, but it becomes that structure first. And as such, the molecular productive elements, the desiring machines themselves, don't have the sort of freedom to just bloop, go off and connect however the fuck they do. And yes, Shakespeare, I love Nabokov. So yes, I like Nabokov, and I do like King, Queen, and Knave. Nabokov's great. Some are difficult reads that I think a lot of people misread, but yeah, Nabokov's good. That's the short version. Questions, comments, notes on this, please. Queen of Swords. We are made to only be able to understand the state through paternalistic mommy, daddy, me dynamics. The country, mommy, the government, daddy, the individual within the society is me. Yeah. There are ways in which that makes sense, but it crushes all other relationships and implies people don't fit into that structure, aren't true Scotsmen, for example. I think it's not incorrect in this. Again, though, it's about how you're saying it and why. The process through which we are raised in the social production of capital and the nature of today's world creates the relationships and creates the internal systems that I have, the way desire and production works and how it gets invested that as I become more invested in mommy, daddy, me, as I become more invested in those relationships, and as desire flows through those structures more and more and more, and I repeat this, and I like this. And as I start repeating with other people, I have a teacher, school marm. I have the strong disciplinarian teacher, dad. I have other people in my life, my first boss. As I'm repeating these structures, and as I'm doing this over and over, that record scratch that's happening inside of the recording process is continually getting deeper and deeper. And desire is able to invest itself over and over and over and over in those ways and find ways to invest itself. But it's trapped in that groove, just like a gigantic gorge that water can't flow out of suddenly. It's slowly wearing away until it has nowhere else to go except wherever the gorge is saying, and it will continue to go that fucking way. Is that because that gorge was always there? Or is it because we made the gorge in the person? You can end up, one takes you down a different path. If you want to go down the psychoanalytic path of, well, everything is mommy, daddy, me. So you need to properly be able to handle yourself and triangulate yourself to be a healthy person in society, because this is how people need to deal with each other. Or is it that you're saying water is meant to flow free? We need to understand that the gorge wasn't always there, that we've worn it into ourselves, and we're building gorges in our own children and in the society at large, and we need to work on figuring out how to stop gorges. That's the deal. Does that make sense, Queen of Swords? All right. LJ brings up as fair. I mean, there's a reason I have the white and black here and the black and white. I have found the white text on black much easier to read. Other people find it harder to read. I'm not having to read that though. So, let's open up. If anyone would like to sort of shift that, I can undo that. Let me see. Let me see if I can just do that real quick. Let's see if I can just pop that. No. No, that didn't work at all, Brooks. Terrible. You're terrible at this. Thank you, I know. Now, why is that working the way that it is? Now, we'll leave it white and black for now. I also don't think it looks as cool. I like the look of the other one, but we'll do this for a moment. The war of black and white, white on black. I know it's everything, you know, everything's a race war metaphor, right? But hopefully this makes sense though, because as we make our way into the next little bit here and we start talking about Andre Green and some of the other elements in the next paragraph, it's important to have like this baseline set up. If everyone gets that. Does everyone get it? I'm hoping so. All right. Legal effects follow along with the voice call. We have a lot of Anti-Oedipus here. I will share a PDF. That's probably the best bet. 1 second. I have the PDF somewhere. I know I do. There's the PDF is now shared in the Discord if you would like. We're on page 307 of the PDF. Page 307 of the book. PDF is some other page. I don't even know what page at this point. That's the short version of that paragraph that's set up. As we're moving forward, this is the theme we're talking about. It's about breaking down when we do this, and all of us do this. This is the nature of capital. Do not pretend like you're super special. We all do this. We all utilize language and structures and representational spaces to make points. Go watch a debate on YouTube and just see how often this happens hilariously as people are talking past each other because they're not even utilizing the same words, or how words get turned against people when they don't really mean that. Or where you go, oh my God, they said that? How awful of them. Presuming what they mean, because again, the words are fungible, the meaning's fungible. These things shift and play differently. It's a completely different beast. Please, I heard someone wanting to talk. Please, go for it.
Yeah. I want to wrap it up and said, like, Hume said that, like, already, like, we use these representation to avoid talking nonsense, right?
Mm-hmm.
To borrow the expression from Hume. We talk about government, about these kind of things, and about trade and these kind of things to kind of avoid talking nonsense. That's it, right? That's...
Yeah. I mean, and it's also, I think, yes, the short version is yes. We're about to get into that even deeper, and actually, because Andre Green, who the next little bit here, where Andre Green starts talking about, Andre Green played very much from that same setup. He was contemporaneous to a lot of Deleuze and Guattari's work himself, and for him, he really wanted to sort of talk about how the real productive forces at work, the way that desire is manufactured or produced, and how desire produces that, and how it interacts with the familial and the others. His critique of psychoanalytic thought, which they're using here, is pretty fantastic. And we're going to get into that in the next bit, because it's important to sort of, through this, and I am not the person to be teaching you about Lacan or psychoanalysis. There are smarter, better people doing that and have been playing at that in our server and elsewhere. So as I do it, I'm going to be necessarily oversimplifying. So just be aware. And if it intrigues you, go down that road. When we talk about a couple little bits, and we'll figure it out as we sort of make our way through, but we're about to be talking about the imaginary. And we've kind of already touched on the symbolic and the real. For Lacan, which is, I think, the brunt of a lot of very good critiques of Freud moved on to Lacanian psychoanalysis, and then most of their critiques in this book are focused on people around that sort of space. When we talk about these things, it's important to sort of get right exactly how they operate, that it's not just the id, superego, and ego, that it's actually a more complex relationship of things. We'll be getting into it, but just be aware of that as we make our way through the next paragraph. Any last notes before we move on to the next bit, though? Because I do want to get to Andre Green and then ultimately to Manoni in the next little bit. All right. When Andre Green looks for the reasons that establish the affinity of psychoanalysis with the theatrical and structural representation it makes visible, he offers two that are especially striking. The theater raises the familial relation to the condition of a universal metaphoric structural relation, whence the imaginary place and interplay of persons derives. Inversely, the theater forces the play and the working of machines into the wings, behind a limit that has become impassable, exactly as in fantasy the machines are there, but they're behind the wall. In short, the displaced limit no longer passes between objective representation and desiring production, but between two poles of subjective representation, as infinite imaginary representation and as finite structural representation. Don't worry, we're going to go through this. Thereafter, it is possible to oppose these two aspects to each other, the imaginary variations that tend towards the night of the indeterminate or the non-differentiated, and the symbolic invariant that traces the paths of the differentiations. The same thing is found all over following a rule of inverse relation or double bind. All of production is conducted into the double impasse of subjective representation. Oedipus can always be consigned to the imaginary, but no matter, it will be encountered again, stronger and more whole, more lacking and triumphant by the very fact that it is lacking. It will be encountered again in its entirety in symbolic castration. And it's a sure thing that structure affords us no means for escaping familialism. On the contrary, it adds another turn. It attributes a universal metaphoric value to the family at the very moment it has lost its objective literal values. psychoanalysis makes its ambition clear. To relieve the waning family, to replace the broken down familial bed with the psychoanalyst's couch, to make it so that the analytic situation is incestuous in its essence, so that it is its own proof or voucher on par with reality. I know there's a lot of phrasing in here. It's a lot said. It is good stuff, though, so we're going to do it. Andre Green, French psychoanalyst. Pretty good writer overall. Really interesting stuff if you ever want to get into psychoanalysis a little bit and see for sure a handful of Guattari's sort of inspirations are clearly someone he had a significant amount more contact with than I think scholarship is aware of. But he plays in the space talking about, he critiques psychoanalysis a lot, but he's like, there's kind of these two things that like the theatrical or this representational space affords psychoanalysis that attracts psychoanalysis so much to it. First, there is the universalizing of the family. The theatrical, the theater of all of this, sort of takes family relations, the setup of the mommy, daddy, me, to this universal metaphorical structure. The same way that we talk about like the hero's journey in literature. We take it to this place of being universal and thus make it universal. So there's this thing that happens where we have almost an imaginary interplay of place and person, which I think is the phrasing he gets at here. That's where he's pushing at. So that's the first part, is it gives us that space where those things are the only things playing with each other. A universal metaphorical structure just with those things. Imaginary place, imaginary people interplaying. And it takes all the machinery that Freud absolutely and Lacan, all of them like really get at, like the production of desire, the way these things connect, the way that these things happen. They've all written about this or done talks about it. But machinery's gross, and it puts it behind the scenes. If you've ever seen like a really grand stage play, I remember going to see Les Mis when I was like 13 and being stunned at like how much shit was happening that was ostensibly an optical illusion for me, but was complex machinery of rotating stages and gigantic set pieces on ropes and weights and gears and all kinds of stuff that changed everything. But I was all behind curtains in another room, in another area, not on stage, not for me. What it does is the theater forces the play to the front and the machines to the rear behind a limit that is impassable. It's, for Lacan, the real we simply cannot engage with at all. There's no way to engage with it. This isn't like Neo in the Matrix. Oh, you can take a pill and no, there's no way to engage with the real. Once you're broken from it, that's it. And so it is the unknowable, the terror on the other side of those things. That is the deal. It's behind the wall of the imaginary, the wall that's placed there. This thing that's happening here, this displaced limit, which they talked about a little bit before, the displaced limit of desiring production. This isn't really about really having that limit there. It's not that. It's the displacement of it, the movement, as they said in the previous, into social production. It's not just into that, but instead actually the limit of desiring production is now completely fucked up. It's no longer, hey, it's kind of molecular here and molar there, and we don't really know where it is. But those are kind of the two sides of the coin, and we'll play with that. No. Instead, it's on the one side, we have the imaginary, and on the other side, the symbolic. This is the things that things move between. This is why they brought up Vorstellung and Darstellung. On the one side, we have the imagined, the thing as it's seen, and then the other we have the structural element, the symbolic, the exhibition, the theatrical performance of the thing. These two sides are now actually where the displaced limit sits. So it's not about separating objective representation from desiring production, as it was, but instead dividing subjective representation into two forms: realm of fantasy and the symbolic order. This is what Lacan did. This is a double bind. This is the double bind. They phrase it here. This is how they talk about it elsewhere. Another one of the paralogisms, by the way. But this double bind is essentially all the productive capacities, all the productive potential of desire is captured now in this space of representation, because it's either imaginary or symbolic. Desire can't just be the force. It can't just be desire. It has to be a desire for something. It has to be a personalized desire. It has to be a thing. That makes sense? Hopefully that makes sense, at least in some level. Because go for it, please.
Brooks, when in the early writing, right, Deleuze said that when desire, I'm asking this question, when desire get trapped into the symbolic, right?
Mm-hmm.
When desire get trapped, right, and narrowed down into this representation of the symbolic.
Yep.
That's my question, I guess.
It happens in it happens within the three syntheses. Everything happens in the three syntheses. We have at first, just to run through it very quickly, and then Noah's here. I think Noah's still here. Maybe Noah left. Noah's been doing super deep dives into them recently. It can probably give a far more detailed version, but the way desire works is partial objects, the infinitude of them, the multitude of them. These are not the part of your finger. These are like the things that cannot be named. They're so partial to everything else. But partial objects connect and disconnect. In the moment of connection, the desire fount, the power of that connection is both created and consumed in a point where it's turned into a different type of energy. This libidinal desire moves into that of recording, then that of consumption, consummation. This is the way desiring production works, as they talk about it. As they do this, and as sort of time moves on and we have sort of complexity, they add in other elements, a body without organs, for example, which is an element of stability and consistency that's found within the multitude of them that ends up falling back on itself. Inside of this connective, disconnective, consumptive process, there are a lot of ways to completely get things fucked with. But it's not in the process itself that things are fucked with. It's in the way that desire falls back on itself, because desire doesn't exist outside of time and space. Desire exists very much in time and space. And so you were born, and all of the productive partial objects and desiring machines that are within you were born at a point that exists in a time and a place, that you are told things, you're warned things, you experience things from the outside that you, over time, they fall back on. The same way that at some point you start calling things, oh, I'm hungry right now. Are you hungry? Do you know what hunger is? Hunger is a thing that you actually can't fucking conceptualize, but you know a handful of reactions tends to mean that because of this and this and this, that thing that starts happening as this repetitive process happens throughout childhood, as we grow, turns us into the neurotic, psychotic, schizophrenic, whatever fucked up people that we are today. And in that, it's because the paralogisms, the desiring machine process has become broken. And so we have representation at some point falling back on itself, where we presume we created our own desires. Falling back on itself is a thing that goes back to Marx. When the capitalist falls back on production, when a capitalist says, like Elon Musk, I made this car, look at my car I made. He didn't do anything, like literally irrelevant to the process, almost entirely. He put money into it, but a lot of people made that car in a lot of ways, but he falls back on it. And lo and behold, look at the number of sycophantic dumb fucks who are absolutely like, look, Elon Musk, did you see him? He made rockets that fucking fly. He made, that's the singular, the representation falling back on production, taking credit for itself and collapsing it into what he is. This is not just a thing that happens in capitalism. This is a thing that happens across the board. We do this all the time. We do this with existence. But in production, it's especially pointed because we tend to think that the factory is where the bread is made. But that's not how it works. The factory is a step in the process of bread, usually just at the very end. Bakeries and other factories are involved, plus factory farms, but also just farmers. Like, there's a multitude, but all of that gets collapsed under bread making. The representation falls back on the thing. I do this. We all do this. I want pizza. Do you really want, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, as a thing, what the fuck does that even mean? The response to it, I made this. I am doing this. I am angry. You made me. You know what? The worst thing is you made me angry, Marcellus. By asking this question, you pissed me off. What the fuck does this is not how the interactions happened, but these are how we've claimed them. And if you go back, you can do this through Nietzsche, Spinoza, Hume, anyone. The way that we handle the production of desire, by falling back on it and claiming it, by ascribing it to higher powers, lower powers, whatever it may be as we make our way through, this is the brunt of what he's sort of getting back on. When we talk about production of desire and the multitude of everything that is sort of making it up, and you decide to go out the front door because you want to, you are falling back on desire, presuming it as a singular thing that you want. You chose. You fall back on it. So when we talk about this is the point of falling back on. This is the section on body without organs. All of chapter 1 goes over se rabat sur, which is falling back on the falling back on thing over and over and over. But this falling back on, where it's like, oh, the process folds on itself, and we see the folding. You take a tablecloth, fold it up so it's got only a handful of corners, that kind of thing. We fall back on, we fold over, we collapse it, we crush it. And then we actually get invested in it. Desire is still investing. We can't stop desire from pumping out and doing things. Like, desire is still doing stuff. People are invested in Elon, not because, like, people, if we don't find a use for energy, energy will find a use for us. It doesn't end just because, I get it now. No, desire is still pumping. It's still moving. We still have representation out there. And as these things happen, how we see the world, how we invest in it, is determined by how we invest in these structures and how these structures allow us to invest in it over and over and over. And it puts us in a place where this is the double bind ultimately. It's either that a thing is entirely symbolic, which means there's a transcendent property to it of transference that we can share. Like, look, the jobs are like a family. You try to be a good dad at work, try to be a good boss, but sometimes you need tough love. If you think they're bullshitting when bosses say this, they're not. This is how they relate to that. And how do you relate to them? Probably as a child, more or less. A country being the man, the male, the dad, as being the leadership, even if it's a woman. That's a thing that people talk about, the masculine presumption of leadership versus the fertile ground of the country through that we were all birthed from. This is the way that these relationships set us up. So we are a son of America, a daughter of the revolution, whatever it may be. That's how we relate, and we invest in those relationships as we go. This is how all of it falls back on.
And it falls back on itself, right?
Yes.
And this falling back contain a reterritorialization and reterritorialization, right? And deterritorialization at the same time.
Yes.
Tantamount to the social production and desire and production at the same time, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, this is like the line, the idea of the great man. Someone in our chat says the lone genius trope is pervasive in our society. We are a silly society and world who thinks of people as the world is built by great men. A man decided. George Washington led the troops in the Revolutionary War. Abraham Lincoln led the troops in the Civil War, or like whatever it may be. We think of it as great man. But why do we do that? It's because we think of our family as being led by great men or woman, doesn't matter, but great masculine figure. that thing, that relationship is, as I'm growing and as I'm being taught, especially in America, but this is, I think, across the West and more pervasive in the East than I think people want to admit. But there is a single person very much who is leading and who is responsible for the family, and that lineage is the grandmothers or the grandfathers, that the family is all of theirs. They're the matriarch or patriarch. This space of how we think of the structure of our family just transfers over because it is generalized symbolic representation. Again, we're investing in the structure, not the things.
Yeah, not the thing in itself, but the structure, like the familiar relations, right?
Mhm.
The representations, right? Like for example, I don't know, it's a joke or not, but politicians in Libya have this kind of, when they take bribes, right? When they take kind of bribes from, American, like the Americans, or take bribes like because they want to eliminate a guy or someone in the system, right? They call America, that's cringe, right? But like I would say, they call America Mama America, right?
Mhm.
We call it Mama.
Oh no, and Trumpers talk about Daddy Trump. Like this is,
Yeah.
but it goes, and and again, it's deeper than just this. Oh, look at the reactionaries. So like, and I just did it myself, where it's like companies that talk about the workplace being a family. Here's the thing, though, like that term is an empty thing. Family is a position that we fill based on generalized experience or presumption. The idea of a workplace being a family, why shouldn't it be? Like, and I mean that. It's when we talk about it being a family, when it's talked about what is so good about a family? Like, what is a family that makes it so sacrosanct? Well, often we talk about, well, with family, we're there kind of to support each other. Money matters less. It's not about necessarily getting paid. So having this pay relationship with that and having it not involved with family, and I'm like, your family doesn't loan money to each other or deal with financial issues as a unit. Like the way that all of it works is like a business. A marriage is effectively a business. A family is effectively a business. The things that we don't like about that phrasing, welcome to work, we want to treat like family. We know the thing we don't like, but it isn't actually in the language because the language is symbolic. We know how it's being used. We know what it's being pushed at, and we know how, again, we invest in it. That thing sucks. A family can't fire you either. Well, this would be the thing. Shouldn't we make workplaces more like families then? Unions and things like that? Shouldn't we be fighting for that as a thing instead of saying, let's not make any workplace like a family? Why don't we demand all workplaces be just like families? In fact, let's demand we all treat each other like brothers and sisters that can't be fired and that we have to accept and that we have to learn to live with. Maybe there's something there. But again, what does that mean? It's the symbolic layer that inside of that is able to fit in what it needs to for social investment of desire. Whatever it needs to. For you, for me, for the worker, for the boss. For the boss may mean it exactly the same as I'm saying it right now. His investment in it is from a different position. The way he's coming to it, his incentive structure. The symbol is empty. It is a structuration that desire will invest within.
When I worked in the NGO, right? They always emphasize like the idea, and I always like get bothered by it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because on the one hand, right, they say like we will plan for this kind of yada yada yada. Like the plan doesn't match the kind of the, like, when they plan a project, right? We'll do yada yada, like we will do this kind of solar system to people in the south of Libya, right? And but like the data analysis sometimes doesn't map, right? And you have dysfunctions in the bureaucracy. And some people, complain about like transportation, and some people like, and I remember, having the call center, right?
and seeing people complain and their organization say to me like, you have to, if they complain about transportation, don't like steer the conversation, and don't. I feel like a shitty human being. Like I feel like I fe- at this moment I felt like shitty human being, but to the point, like they say these organization structure, they say like we are family, right? But like what family talking about? Like it's very alienating,
Well,
right?
but
Like
it's not just that it's alienating. Like, this is the thing to remember, is the alienation is because of the lack that is in the structure, which is what they're talking about here. It's built into the structure necessarily, so we're not going to be able to connect directly with it. We feel it a little bit more with the family that we love and we care about, that we've grown with to a point. But again, there's also the same issue there. The nature of that symbolic structure allows anything to fit inside of it. And as it allows anything to fit inside of it, because it's play acting, which is, again, the phrasing they're using is really, really important. The machinery of what a family is goes behind the walls. Behind the walls. The machinery of a family. The theater forces the play and working of it into the walls, and the familial relation becomes this universal metaphorical. And so it's what Andre Green wrote. That's what they're putting in this paragraph. This is the thing that happens with that phrasing. So it's insidious in that it's able to become universal. It means kind of anything to everyone. And it really isn't about, it's like a family, but no one who's has an abusive family, the first thought they go is like, oh, you mean you're going to beat the shit out of me? Or you mean my uncle's going to rape? Like, this is not, we're going to have Thanksgiving dinners. Like, that's not the first thing people go to. That's particulars. The universal thing that we go to is when we say, hey, family. Oh, family. That's it. It's a symbolic representational play, not a specific thing. And as such, it stays in that universal transcendent thing where we can invest in it overall.
and it will be like a vicious circle, right? A vicious circle that kind of like you cannot get out from this, universal representation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Become a vicious circle.
Sure. And it's, and again, I would argue that workplaces are like families. The examples everyone gives are like, even in chat, just real quick, I got two super chat. Someone asking, is Destiny good politically? No one's good politically. Everyone's terrible. That makes it easy. And everyone's terrible philosophically. And thank you, Grizzler. Love you very much. When I say work is like family, I can tell you how it is exactly. But a boss is saying that what he really means is he's going to expect you to do extra work. Yes, like your family does. Like I'm trying to get my kid to do chores. Feel free to enjoy that journey. But I'm a boss trying to get the kid to do extra labor. I'm not planning to threaten him with eviction, but I know kids whose parents have. Absolutely. It's actually very common. Well, you're under this house. This is what you'll do, or else you won't get your allowance. You won't get money. You won't get food. We're sending you to bed without food. Workplaces are a lot like families. We just don't like talking about the particularities of what families really mean these days. It's used as a way for us to have a symbolic language. And it's used in a way that allows it to fit. But do not mistake yourself to think that the way you're using it is different than the boss, or with different intentions or different setups, or that he's evil for saying it. There is every reality that your boss means it, that he wants it to become like a family, that he just wishes people would be there and that they'd be working hard, and he wants to have a great time, and he wants to do that, and he wants to be dad. Maybe he wants that. Maybe he's why it doesn't mean he's doing it cynically. That thing that we are invested in is everyone. The symbolic things are universal and played with because it's how we're taught to think about these things. So when we talk about how work works, when we talk about how families work, how families family, all of these things become really fucky when we start thinking of them, and we do, representationally based on the images at large. And that's kind of the big thing here, and we will get to that in a little bit later. But how is it that family means something universal, or how that capital teaches us what family means, where we don't first think of the incest rapes, father beating the shit out of their kid, the broken homes or divorced parents? How is it that family means the same kind of thing to almost everyone symbolically? How is that? Because that's Freud and Lacan and others argue that there is like a transcendent element to the sort of shared human experience. Is it? Or is there something else in capital doing that, like maybe production of imagery that we attach to and that plays with this? Again, that allows those images to fall back on actual production, actual connection of vitality in life and lived experience. That's the interplay. If that makes sense. Good.
So these desires are not fantasies or imaginary or imagine, like Lacan said, like these are not fantasies like Melanie Klein or Lacan or
right.
Like these are, yeah.
The line they use early on is the one that, and everyone laughs at it, but they don't take a second. Schreber having sunbeams coming out of his asshole is an early thing everyone laughs about, but it's actually one of the more profound lines if you continue it. This is what always happens in philosophy. It's a great line if you continue it to the next. Schreber has sunbeams coming out of his ass, and they produce, certainly. He's able to describe them. He's able to talk. They have an effect. So if you're going to say that the imaginary doesn't have an effect, which is what a lot of people talk about, that like it doesn't, he's imagining it. The ways that we are invested in things, the spaces of representation and how these things interplay are productive because there's still desire. They're still desiring machines, still producing in fucked up ways, and the production is completely broken, but it is still producing. Schreber's sunbeams made him feel things, and he could break them down and tell you about every little aspect of it. If it was not there, how could he do that? It's producing. It wouldn't do anything else if it was purely imaginary. If it didn't have any effect, it still did. Rest assured, they work. Exactly. I dropped out apparently for a minute on the tubes. I will go find out why. I have no idea. It's not on my side. Fucking YouTube. Not on my side. I have a nice steady connection and I'm streaming at 40 megs per second. So 0 drop frames. So we're affected. And that's, as they go into this and they sort of talk about the nature of the move, they start at the beginning with Andre Green talking about the displaced limit, that we've now shifted between the realm of fantasy and the symbolic order. This is the Lacanian thing. This is the double bind. All productive potential is captured in this closed circuit of representation. It has to, because that's how we understand and make sense of the world. After that, we play completely differently. So we talk about Oedipus, this inescapable structure of Oedipus that exists there. The way that it works is it's consigned to the imaginary. Oedipus is the fantasy, fantasy, a psychoanalytic term, important here. But because it's consigned there, it returns as castration. It returns stronger, more whole in this symbolic element, because the fantasy of it is here, the stage play. The reality of it is that it, as a stage play, it doesn't have the vitality. It necessarily has sort of a piece missing. That's castration that's sort of built in. So ultimately, we end up in this weird place where psychoanalysis doesn't liberate us from structures. It doesn't liberate us from being trapped in this, but instead it actually reinforces them. And it does so in and of itself because it takes, let me step back slightly. Early on, they talk about in chapter 3, they talk about sort of the uncontacted tribes, the prehistoric, the primitive. And in the primitive world, and this continued through into the despotic under kings, who your family was really important to who you were socially. You fucked who you could fuck because you were allowed to. and you would have children with them because you needed to. Your social position was determined by your literal relationships, literally determined how you could do things or who you could do things with and all that stuff. And that continued a little bit. When we get to capital, family is completely removed from production. I'm not saying your family doesn't determine how wealthy you are, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect kind of production overall. It's not the same thing. You have fewer children because children aren't the big deal towards you making it as a family farm anymore. Instead, they're off doing their thing. You have to earn your own money all your life. Once you turn 18, you're on your own in America till death. They're even trying to get rid of after, the way the family works, the structure that was necessary and part and parcel of our survival still exists. But why? There's nothing there that's like necessary. Not really. Feel free to explain to me how family structures are necessary for our survival. They might be nice, you can make arguments, but I know people who have survived very nicely without having them, without having kids, adopting kids, or gay marriages, or weird polycules and all kinds of shit. People are able to survive just fine. A lot of them can end up being successful. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, has the most non-normative family structure that exists. He inseminates women via test tubes because his penis doesn't work, and has kids everywhere. He's not even vitally in his own family. Family is irrelevant across the board. So why is it still here? Why? It's because the structure is what we're invested in. Because the family is continually revisited and pushed back into us. The family is given a universal metaphorical value from early in our lives, in media, in everything, and in, as they say, psychoanalysis, therapy, and this is true of all. This isn't just psychoanalysis. This is like psychiatry, all of that stuff. The family as structure is given to us. Despite families literally, as they say, breaking down, the family structure is shattering. And this was 50 years ago. So right now they'd be like really fucking busted. So as it's breaking down, it's still somehow moving into the symbolic place because the machinery goes behind. The broken down familial bed replaced by the psychoanalyst couch is the transition they're talking about. It's no longer that the family structure is cared for by the family. Instead, it's been transferred, the symbolic elements of it, transferred to the psychoanalyst, transferred to the ivory tower. Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and Rush Limbaugh as I was growing up, and Donald Trump, the family is the most important thing to all of them. They say, none of them mean it. They're invested in the idea of the family, but none of them mean it. They value people who break it all the time. They value the very structure that is destroying it, and they do nothing to rebuild it because they're interested in the structure, not the vitality behind it, the thing that drives it, the family push, the love of a family for each other, the way that we need each other, whatever that is, that's gone. And so there's this really weird thing that the analytic situation is doing as they're talking about this, and this is their critique at the time, but it's that the analytic situation itself becomes incestuous in its essence, so that its own proof of voucher is on par with reality. Again, behind the scenes, the same setup. They're making that core critique. In some countries, it continued as far as the 1970s. Yes, I guess. The family is a fascinating unit to sort of break down like what it means and how we do it. And when you look at conservatives, and it's an important part of this, when they talk about how important the family is, don't say we don't value. I get that. I'm a family man. I got 2 kids and a dog and a cat and a wife. I mean, I am the demographic. I'm the white American cis male, whatever you fucking want to say. But that thing like that I have is an accident more than anything. Like my wife and I wanted to have kids, but I didn't want to have a family. The structures, the repulsion or attraction towards the structures and the symbols of it, they're not the lived experience of the thing. They're not actually the stuff. That difference is the big deal. The symbolic pushing the machinery behind. So it's all that, and then we just get the play on stage versus the actual productive, ongoing reality that is made as things move. That's desiring production. And that is where they make sort of their next sort of critique. Any questions before I move on to the next and probably last paragraph for the day, because this is a big boy. I will leave open for a moment. Let's see. I'm not getting any major stuff. How can you become indifferent to structure? I can't help but be opposed to it. Well, you are doing the thing of an animal stuck in tar, pulls harder, which makes it sink faster, flailing about. That thing is not a thing to be pulled against or forward. But structures are themselves also not necessarily like real. They're visible, they're representational, but they're not like, they themselves aren't material. Not in the same sense. They're the investments of them, the symbolic elements, the way desire invests in them. There's materiality, but that repetition in time that's continually happening. It's the awareness of that. And that's, again, my argument, and it's, I think, a big deal of what we're going to be running into as we make our way, is that you don't necessarily work against structures. Doing that is, it's playing into the structure by working against it. An inverse image of a structure is still an image of that structure. The understanding of how desire works through you, that you don't, by the way, it's not you, it's your desires. First, getting a handle on that, understanding that you are a structure that you're investing in, and then making your way to move beyond that to understanding how your desiring machines are directly investing through you. And then with that, being able to modify and make sense and sort of shift how those things work is kind of the process that we're talking about here, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think this is going to be a little bit of a longer, I feel like this is going to be a little bit longer. This is going to be tougher. This has some of my favorite references in it, though, I think. So this is the Archie Bunker section, which I fucking love. So I'm a sucker for it. When I was apparently like the first thing I ever like watched on TV regularly, my parents would watch All in the Family, and I was like 1. Yeah, no, I'm dating myself. I would crawl in from the other room just to watch the intro and then leave again. Fucking loved it. It's a good show. You should watch it. If you don't know your history, Matt Bauman, who I have mentioned many times on this channel, and you should go absolutely dig into as much as possible. He does a phenomenal history of sort of queer television, and All in the Family is one of his that he talks about, the Norman Lear and the people behind it and what happened and how it worked. And it's an incredible story. But I'll get to that in a minute. We'll continue. And Estelle, we'll get to things to do. They're going to be getting to the tasks of schizoanalysis here very shortly. That's important to remember is we're in the introduction to schizoanalysis, and one sec. The first positive task. So this is introduction to schizoanalysis is the rest of this section. Then we get to the positive task and then the negative tasks, like how we do this stuff, like what you can do and how you can sort of deal with it. That's going to be the big push. Come on. So much Lacan. This is going to be so much Lacan after this. Next week is going to be like all Lacan. I might want to try to just charge through it because it's like, it's a lot. All right. In the final analysis that is indeed what is at issue, as Octave Manoni shows, how can belief continue after repudiation? How can we continue to be pious? We have repudiated and lost all our beliefs that proceeded by way of objective representations. The earth is dead, the desert is growing. The old father is dead, the territorial father, the son too, the despot Oedipus. We are alone with our bad conscience and our boredom. our life where nothing happens. Nothing left but images that revolve within the infinite subjective representation. We will muster all our strength so as to believe in these images from the depths of a structure that governs our relationships with them and our identifications as so many effects of a symbolic signifier. The good identification. We are all Archie Bunker at the theater, shouting out before Oedipus, "There's my kind of guy, there's my kind of guy." Everything, the myth of the earth, the tragedy of the despot, is taken up again as shadows projected on a stage. The great territorialities have fallen into ruin, but the structure proceeds with all the subjective and private reterritorializations. What a perverse operation psychoanalysis is, where this neo-idealism, this rehabilitated cult of castration, this ideology of lack culminates, the anthropomorphic representation of sex. In truth, they don't know what they are doing nor what mechanism of repression they are fostering, for their intentions are often progressive. But no one today can enter an analyst's consulting room without at least being aware that everything has been played out in advance. Oedipus and castration, the imaginary and the symbolic, the great lesson of the inadequacy of being or of depression, or of dispossession, Psychoanalysis as a gadget, Oedipus as a reterritorialization, a retimbering of a modern man on the rock of castration. How is it that we believe in shit? It's like a weird, we have no one. If you were to ask, do these people believe this shit? They're going to go, no. No one believes this shit. People don't believe this stuff. This is, yes, Estelle, this is, God is dead and we are still walking around the halls of his torso. This is that kind of talk, because there's this weird thing that's happened where we've repudiated and lost our beliefs. We don't really believe in the family. Even the conservatives who ostensibly do it, it's not the same belief in the family. We believe that the structure of the family will help the structure of society. That's kind of as far as that belief goes. We believe it's best, but believing in the family, that's kind of tough. Octave Manone wrote a book, Keys for the Imaginary. And it's what they open up with. There's this line that Manone kind of says a lot and is known for. It's, I know very well, yet all the same. I know very well, but all the same. Just place that somewhere into whatever. Look, I know very well that my existence inside of a capitalist society is ultimately taking advantage of third world countries and manufacturing processes that are painful and all this. But all the same, I'm kind of going to vote for Trump. I know very well, but still, that thing that's really weird. This is how disavowal works as a thing, how we're able to maintain beliefs despite intellectually repudiating them. And an extraordinary number of people have them. This is how most of us talk about these things. This is how representation again operates. People who are hyper intellectual will say, look, I don't really believe in the family. And then they'll recreate the structure themselves without knowing it. They'll say that they are very aware that it's silly to look at Greek myths as though it's the truth. Yet Foucault will say that castration and lack are necessary for desire. I know very well, but all the same, this thing that happens as we do this is the problem with how representation and alienation is operated. Alienation is this. You know very well that you don't own the business and that you don't really have say over everything. Yet, let me explain my world. Aside from that, I was CEO once, but I wasn't the investors and I wasn't the source of money. I wasn't the capitalist. I was CEO, boss of the company, founder of the company. Good times. All the other jobs I've had, and even kind of that, I knew very well that I didn't have total freedom, that I could be fired at any time, that anything could fall apart at any time. This is not a passion thing. This is not my thing. This is someone else controls this. I shouldn't get personally in. Yet, all the same, I treat it as if it is my own. I pour myself into whatever work I'm doing in every single way. I'm not alone in this. I pour myself, I don't give a shit. Like, I know very well that I'm being paid minimum wage and they would pay me less if they could, and that they value me that little. But all the same, this way that these things work, this way that this plays, is really important to understanding how desire and representation fuck with these things. Because the direct relationship between reality and representation has simply collapsed. We once had this. This is, again, the way that we got symbols, the way we got words. There was some deeper connection, the way that they talk through the earth socius, where when we talk about and we say things like making marks in the ground or how we are one with our environment, quite literally, you can look and watch the recordings of entire cultures and civilizations over the course of thousands of years based on how they built and what they did in the ground. They literally wrote their history into their ground. It's incredible. That thing we don't really have anymore. We're broken from that. We're separated from that. We don't believe in things anymore. Not really. But we still maintain the belief structure. We don't believe in the family. The family is not the big deal, but we believe in family. Okay? We don't believe in business. No. But we believe in business. Somehow these things fucking happen. Everyone does this. Again, everyone's a hypocrite. Yes, we all are hypocrites. I know hyper lefty trans people who are dying to pass as a cis woman as like the cure for their own ailments. They know gender. They're gender abolitionists. They know this, but they still want to, and they still believe in passing. I get it. This thing that happens, we are in a weird place where we are so broken. Reality and representation are so shattered that we believe in things without believing. We believe in the structure of the thing, not the thing. We don't have that same energy flowing through it. We don't have the desire flowing through the thing, but we believe in the structure. We believe in the setup of it. The earth is dead, the desert growing. Nietzsche's God is dead. The old father is dead. The territorial father, this pre-symbolic authority that existed, that sort of showed us what was there, and we had to use, graphism in order to survive and all that. The despot Oedipus, the organizing principle of psychoanalysis itself, is also dead. People in psychoanalysis don't believe in fucking Oedipus as like a thing. Like, I know Jungians. Jordan Peterson is ostensibly a Jungian. You could argue he used to be more than he is now. I know Jungians. I don't know any of them who believe in the totality of the collective unconscious. Not in the same way. They believe in it. They're using it in a different way, but it's not quite that same thing anymore. This modern subjectivity that exists within capital is completely different. Instead, what we have left after all of that, beliefs and all this, we have our, as they sort of lay out, we have our bad conscience and boredom, which I love the phrasing of that. The idea that there's nothing left but these images that revolve with an infinite subjective representation. The structures that govern our relationships with these images. And then there's the Archie Bunker line. If you don't know who Archie Bunker is, Archie Bunker, I would get demonetized if I shared it over because it's owned by, I believe, ABC, and they are bastards across the board. But if you don't know, the setup for Archie Bunker is simple. He is the old man. This was a show that aired in, again, the 70s. He was an old man from like the last generation, the greatest generation, whatever you want to phrase. And he was kind of generally racist, homophobic, sexist, but he was like not a bad person. It was a really amazing thing they did with the show, where basically over time he learned what he was and how to be, and he actually estranged his wife, cheating and like really awful things. There was a reality to him that pulls through. But how he worked is he was like a good old boy, and he was always excited about like X, Y, or Z. And so if you think of it, the line they have here, we are all Archie Bunker at the theater shouting up for Oedipus, that's my kind of guy. That's my kind of guy. We're not Oedipalized. We don't believe in Oedipus. We are aware we're at the movie theater. We're immersed in Oedipus the same way that we're immersed in Master Chief or Mario or whatever the fuck game you're playing next week. Any of these things. Archie Bunker at the theater, that's my kind of guy. Yeah, that Oedipus. Yeah, the way that he goes about his shit, I dig that. That's my kind of guy. That thing. Feel free to replace it with whoever else. That setup. That's my kind of guy. Oh, wait. Sherry BB. Wait, really? In the French? Interesting. Which part is that? Because they don't have Archie Bunker in the original? That's fascinating because interesting. That's really fucking upsetting. God damn it. I'm not even gonna get it. I don't obscure French literature is not like a thing I think that people give a fuck about. I think it works either way. Cherry BB is like if I remember right, he's generally the same kind of thing though. Like he's a privileged but good-hearted kind of dickhead kind of thing. Like Archie Bunker's thing is that he's a good-hearted, like a good dude at heart, but he does have power over people. I'll have to look into this. It's a whole fascinating thing. But Archie Bunker is perfectly fine. Pick out anything. That's my kind of guy. It's not that I believe in him, but the structure of what he is. It's my kind of guy. This is how people talk about superheroes now too. Thanos, that's my kind of guy. I get why Thanos did what he did. Superman, my kind of guy. The Joker, Batman, whatever. It's like this. We don't believe in these characters anymore, but we deal with them in that way. Everything, the myth of the Earth Despot, is taken up again, but now it's shadows projected on stage instead of the sort of direct apprehension or the direct power of the state or other thing. It's a completely different setup. The territorialities, as he says, falls into ruin. Such a good fucking line. I really, really like this. The great social structures of old are in ruins. And we are invested in their structures, in private versions of them, my version of them, not yours, not the global. When people talk about like this is that look, Twitter is the fucking the commons. This is the public square of the future. Aha. So, example. No one believes in the fucking public square. There isn't one. But we like the idea of it. And we still like it. We don't believe in the public square, or we'd have one. Instead, we like the idea of it. And so we have a billionaire who privately owns the public square. Dropkick Murphys, a band I love. They're wonderful. Phenomenal in concert if you ever get to see. In concert about a week or two ago, gave a lot of shit to a Trump voter and completely made an ass of him. And he was a good sport about it, thank God. But because they were anti-Trump, Dropkick Murphys got suspended from Twitter for doing shit off Twitter because that's the public square that a private billionaire owns. How is that possible? Well, it's because these are no longer the big, grand social machines of old, the social structures of old that were there. Instead, we're invested in the structures of them that exist personally. The idea of the public square, to me, that's the deal. Not the ideal of sex, because they're D&G, we're not against sex. We love sex, but we've anthropomorphized it. We've talked about sex as my sex, where my penis goes, or your vagina receives, or your ass or your mouth. Sex is between me and someone else, not sex. We don't believe in sex as a thing. We believe in sex, mine. That's the problem. This perverse operation of the private reterritorialization of these symbols ends this process. This is where we're at, is we've privately reterritorialized. It's not that all of us are invested in the same public square. It's that the symbol of the public square and the structure of it is invested by each of us individually. And that changes everything, because now psychoanalysis has fucked up, and we've all fucked up, because it's not so much that we have a grasp, as they say, of what is happening here, what mechanism of repression that's actually being put in place here. It's not that. The problem now is that it's all privatized. We're creating privately repressing individuals, people who push things into themselves and treat it as symbolic, as in themselves first. That's the problem. This is where we're at. I will pull up the French version after this, Estelle. That's fascinating. Archie Bunker is a better call for English for sure, because I would not have looked up the other one. At all.
Like it sounded wrong for some French people, from French guys, to be bringing up American references. I assume Archie Bunker is American.
Very American, yes.
So I just got my copy of it. Do you have one with that is better than mine? The French version?
Probably not. All I know is the one that's like the double page shitty scans, as if someone slapped it on a copier. That's the one I have.
Oh, I have a. Well, I may have a better one though. Then it's in the QC library.
All right, let me see. I've got like 3 different versions. Let me see. No, that is not a PDF. Fuck, stupid fucking computer. Not that one. Oh, I have a pretty decent one. Here.
Yeah, you've put it. You've put.
I may have put it up before. I have like, the problem is like I do not have an organization system for PDFs, so I just need to go through and like open them and delete the ones that are shitty, because like I have 5 PDFs of L'Anti-Oedipus and 4 of them are shit and 1 is good, but they all are titled the same thing because they're all fucking the same book with the same, like it's not like they're different books.
I think you got it from me.
I probably did, actually. I probably did. This one did not come from Z Library, so it probably came from you. Lord.
I put edit in the title. So.
Awesome. But the use of Archie Bunker, Archie Bunker, anyone else, it doesn't really matter. It's we are the guy excitedly at the theater saying, "That's my kind of guy. That Oedipus is all right." Like that's it. This works. It's, oh, John Wick, my kind of guy. It's not. You are experiencing and experiencing the capitalist subjectification, where you are taking the structure you're seeing and turning it into your thing that you're investing directly into, instead of the larger social structures that existed beyond that. Because in Capital, again, the images and the nature of subjectivity are completely different. And so now we have this completely different sort of direction that all of these things go. And it's important because if we go down the general road of psychoanalysis, psychoanalysis is focused on the private person. That's what it is. An analyst and an analysand sitting on a couch in a tiny room where capital is exchanged for an hour and broken off and split off from the rest of the world, explicitly so. Most people in therapy, they will spend a lot of time, the people, the therapist or the psychoanalyst, like dressing the room specifically so that way there's not things for people to get distracted by or to drive them down different roads. You don't like have a whiteboard up where you keep notes from your previous patient. Even that, it's intended to be like broken off and separate because it's about that person. And this is, their critique of psychoanalysis has been this throughout, but they're now dressing it in a very particular way where we talk about how representation moves, how it grows and how it works inside of these spaces, and how it does this inside of you. So that way it's not, look, I don't even believe in Oedipus, so I don't know what the fuck D&G are saying. It's like, you don't have to. It's the symbolic investments that you do believe in, where you go, oh, you know what, the dad and mom thing, yeah, I get that, or whatever the fuck it is. It doesn't really matter. But it's like, yeah, those are my guys. The rest of this, all the lived things, they use the examples of the, I like it, the myth of the earth and the tragedy of the despot, these things that did exist. And as someone in chat said perfectly, I think, Brud, yeah, it's the transition from thunder god to the god of thunder. We move from forest to the arborescent, or the national park, you could say. Like, it's the shift from the overall social machine to the personalized repression machine and the structure therein. And that's the move that they're getting at, that psychoanalysis is absolutely taking part in, but that capitalism is sort of structured around. That generally makes sense.
It's kind of like in when they do these editing, right, in TikTok, right, and god awful, like thanks God that this kind of trend of Sigma or these kind of fucking trend that like passes away, right? But like it's kind of like when they doing these editing, right, and at the same time like saying some kind of like offensive to women, and after that there is a music and there's like Patrick Bateman like in American Psycho, like and people in the comments saying like I hope I like that's me, it's kind of like it's kind of weird, like
well, it's one of those things that the way that people identify with it, but also the way that people relate to it, because this also gets into the how we internally take these things. Because when we say like wait, you were a horse girl growing up, that's like a very loaded phrase symbolically. When we talk about that, it gives us room to discuss, and that's one of the reasons we do. Like it helps us talk to each other. But the phrasing and the way that representation is used in capital takes it one step further, where that symbol is then put to the place of the person we're talking to. And so we're speaking metaphorically, and we're crushing the reality of the situation underneath the symbols. Okay? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so as we do that, and we say like, my favorite is still, and I have to go back to it, is the idea of a man or a woman. You a man, you a woman? What that means and how that works is so deeply, hilariously, personally subjective as a symbolic element that the answer is never yes. Like anyone who answers yes is not answering the question of the person asking, they're answering it for themselves by their own definition, by their own setup. And if Ben Shapiro were to ask me, are you a man or a woman? If I said yes, I'd be answering for him because I know what he's asking. But again, this symbolic layer that is now transferring meaning and playing with it in such an open way that is also not open at all, because it forces things to be in one of the two positions, puts us in the spot where how do we even respond to a thing that allows that? We have ways, Deleuze has ways, we've talked about ways, but that's specifically the thing they're aiming at, that we're in a place where we disavow and we are aware that we disavow, yet still. And that yet still from Mannoni, I think, is incredibly powerful. Once you start grasping how often you do this or how we do this, and I do this all the time, we all do. I don't believe in large-scale government, but still. I don't believe in family structures, but still. I don't believe, but still. Because belief isn't the big deal. It's how the symbolic has our desires pumping through it. Doesn't matter what we fucking believe in. We are invested in the structuration that originally those things were part of. So when and it's kind of thinking about it like that. And again, this is overly sort of particular, but when you think of the way families were, or what the idea of a family was, and the way that desire moved amongst families in prehistoric times, or even in 200 or 300 years ago, it would be very different than how we understand it. But they had the structure of a woman who gave birth to the kids, the dad, the person who fucked the mom to make the kids, and then you had the parents of both those people, and then you had aunts and uncles, brother, like all of that structure was there. But they weren't that structure. They were those things. We're relating them in that way, in that symbolic setup. but they wouldn't call themselves husband and wife. That makes no sense for an unmarried couple. Why would they ever say that? They also wouldn't say mom and dad because that's not how they raised. That's not how raising happened. It was a more collective thing. Dad wasn't the money winner. It's not really how it worked. All of these things as they used to happen and as they particularly then moved on, that movement is what's really fascinating, because now we go, well, look, we've always had the family structure. You'll hear fucking conservatives say this all the time. People have always had mom and dads, and we've needed them, and we needed them around. It's like, yeah, but having that designation, that symbol, is accurate. So what is missing? Well, it's because we're now play acting. We know that the family isn't the same thing as it used to be. No one would ever, you'd be foolish to think it's anything related to how people were raised, 400 or 500 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago. So that thing that we now do, we're taking that structure and we're adding, if you think about it as the lines in relationships, we're filling them with desire, with libidinal energy, with force that isn't there. And so when we say we don't believe in the family, I don't believe in the family, but still, that thing that we do, I think, is incredibly powerful. It's one of my favorite bits from Manoni, and I can't recommend it more. It's incredibly useful to have as a process as you understand more and more about this. I don't believe in the state, for example, but still, I might be running for city council next year. I don't believe in American hegemony, but still, I think we need to be sending money over to Ukraine. It's part of what we need to be doing in the world. Sure. Are those good things or bad things? It's not really about that. It's not really about that. It's not about that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfectly sense. We are beyond good and evil, We
are beyond good and evil.
Yeah. We're the comfortable representation that give us comfort. We have to. It's painful, but we have to walk away from this representation. I don't know how. I don't know why, but we have to find another alternative. Or be aware of it and use it, which would be my argument, and I think Deleuze's as well. You see this in Logic of Sense when he talks about how counter-actualization and how playing with these things works, how paradox and the shift of the symbolic completely can fuck with people's understanding of things and lead to breaks that give them room for lines of flight, which is the big deal. So when someone is saying to you something that they're invested in socially, and they do this all the time, I've always enjoyed doing this with people, but it's actually a really interesting thing to see how they respond, is when they're saying you need to feed the kids a little bit more. They look a little thin. Which, fucking, family, right? The response can be, they're my kids, blah, blah, which is common. Or, yes, mom. Or you try to figure out a complex way to sort of deal with that as a thing. Or you just go, no, actually, I'm trying to starve them to death. My goal is to have children that are completely emaciated so I can take photos of them for a future. Just say the most insane, because that they don't have. They don't have the ability to deal with these things in that same way. Conservatives fall to this a lot, liberals as well. When you do the thing, the proper satire movement, which is the modest proposal, effectively. Look, I understand that poverty is a problem, and there are more and more people every single day, and people who are poor go hungry. And since we seem to be very okay with poverty existing as a thing, and we're not really willing to spend time, then I have a modest proposal. Let us encourage poor people to have as many children as possible, and we will slaughter them, the children, to feed the poor people. Because obviously we don't care about children dying. That thing shifts the conversation, because that argument breaks the understanding. Yeah, you break me now. You break me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, it's not easy. And there's, I think, ways that it needs to be done. And it's a thing we're doing in the Elephant Project, where we're trying to figure out how to counter-actualize general propaganda. That thing, if you can respond properly, where it's taking what they're saying to an extreme, or taking their wording and breaking it and bending it around a turn, the symbolic doesn't survive the contingent. That's not how it works. We can find ways to shove the contingent into the symbolic, but if you're forcing them to confront head on, the contingent wins every time, because the symbolic's stuck up here and the contingent is the lived thing that we're all dealing with. That thing gives us room to fuck with this stuff. And I think with this, because it's one of the great challenges, is as we move forward, it's also embracing the nature of Holland's term for it is the permanent revolution, but it is embracing the fact that stability and the illusion ultimately, but the way that the symbolic gives us consistency is the comfort that keeps us going back to it. We're invested in the things that are comfortable. We're invested in the family and these other things that we see as being necessary for ongoing survival or whatever. None of it's necessary for that, but this is how we see it or emotionally attach or invest in it. When you start moving down this other road, it's not an overnight thing, but as you do it, terror is part of that. You're absolutely going to see the things that you've held on to that are part of the consistency of your worldview and your experience falling away. And as they fall away, it's very easy to go, actually, I'm okay right now. I'll stick with this. And so you kind of end in a weird place quite often. Jimbo Jimbo from YouTube says, so am I saying gender, family, state are a fiction, yet we believe in them in order for things to function properly? It's actually it's slightly more complex than that. And again, the four things to function properly is the deal. That's not the deal either, right? So, let's talk the family. Family has, an organization in which people who produce humans and people who fuck each other and spend a lot of time together, that conglomeration of units of people has always existed. That's a given. Family is not that. We can say it's that, and we can say, oh, I have a large family, whatever. But that's not family. Family is a symbolic investment in that structure that gives very particular relations in between it. If we were to go back and go through all of the different tribes and the ways that they're organized and who raised who and who fucked who and all of that, you would see a massive swath of like possible weird arrangements that existed in weird conditions. But we've coalesced all of that into this mother and father and me. Mother and father raised 2 kids, or mother and father have a couple kids. Family means that structure. And we're invested in it because the images of capital, the space of capital, everything that we're constantly sort of dealing with and the life that we lead and what we see, we're always seeing that organization in those relationships in everything. And desire is the fluxion of change and shifting and the suddenness of it, electricity and water and whatever it may be. They try to find path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is the path it's gone down before. And it will go down over and over and over if capable. And it will find patterns. And you can find these patterns. And it's like over and over and over. Now, the patterns of electricity jumping between points on a board, that there was nothing between. We had no relationships between things. But we start doing that. We jump it up so much that fucking currents arc. And those currents that arc, they actually ionize the air. And in that ionized air, it actually means that that's air that's probably going to be allowed to go through. It's the least resistance. You'll see this over and over and over. And as this happens over and over and over, we step back and instead of realizing that the sparks between things are contingent or in the moment, we go, well, that much power is going from there to there. Here's how this to this, these things, this setup, all of this is the way it should be. This is family. And so suddenly we aren't really invested in family. We're invested in the symbol of family, but not even that. Our desire, us, we feel ourselves flowing through dealing with being part of those structures and investing into them emotionally and effectively and feeling effectively nailed when those things come back on us, when we're not good to our family, when we're going to be thrown out of our family, when we're being ostracized from family. These are things that strengthen and rebuild those relationships. It's not that family never existed or that it's an illusion or anything like that. It's that the idea of family, the symbol, has so much power now in the relationships of it that we are lost inside of it. Yes, we are lost in the molar. We are stuck inside of that. And the way that representation operates means that we can't actually get to the machinery behind the curtain. It's not the man behind the curtain. It's not Wizard of Oz. It's the machinery behind the curtains and all of the rest of it that makes us realize it's bullshit. Video games are not the image you see on screen. They are the multitude of interactions of code that is unknowable in every single way to you. This is how you're taught. This is what you learn. And it's fairly true. It's not like I can look at a computer and see what it's doing, but I can look at the code. But all that's hidden behind. Instead of that, we see the image, we see the story, we see the thing, and we see the way that these things relate. That's what we see as the code, not the code itself. And this is what desire does over time. It is the electricity running through the computer that produces the code, that produces the image on the screen, and it's all behind the screen. We're good with it. Fuck it. I don't need to know the rest of it. I don't need the rest. Who needs it, right? I don't. Do you? No? Good. Yes, Lichtenberg fractal will be an arc finding path there, and do not do the high voltage lightning wood thing. People die from that literally all the time. Don't fucking do it. Go find videos of it though. It's pretty cool looking. But you can see the paths electricity carves. You can see that over time these grooves get deeper. They become easier for things to happen in. It's not that the structure is a thing. We see that over time. We develop it over time. Representation over time becomes something we invest in. It's not the thing. We're mistaking it. But we know that. But with that, we've hit 2 hours. I got to bounce. I got to get back to work, real work. But if you would like to make this my real work so I don't have to do that, you are welcome to by hitting up patreon.com/DGQC, of course, sending super chats and memberships, or joining us at discord.gg/DGQC if you would like to join us in person. We've got a whole bunch of stuff coming. I'll be streaming a little bit more this week, but this weekend, we will be doing a long marathon of responding to Plastic Pill's video on Anti-Oedipus, which will, despite being only a half hour long, take us around 6 hours, I figure, maybe 7. So that'll be fun. But otherwise, thank you all for joining. It's all appreciated. Thank you all for the super chats, and I will talk to you all soon enough.